Mocktails. I'm just letting everyone through the waiting room. We have a few more people to join. Kim, I think we have like, I forgot to check before I jumped on here, but like 200 or more signed up again. This is great. Thanks for doing this.
It is great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
It's a fun partnership, and obviously lots of people are benefiting. So
yeah, and it's, unlike some of the other events that I do, and I do have like kind of a slate of them right now, but this is where everybody gets to set the agenda for us, right? They get to tell us what we want, what they want to talk about. So I love that. I love that.
And so often too, when you're at an event, there's often, and the events and speaking is great, but sometimes you want an opportunity with the person right standing in front of you who can, I have all these questions I want to ask. And so it's nice to just have a total opportunity to just ask whatever you want.
Exactly. Okay, so having said that, let's get started. Welcome everyone to Kegels and Mocktails. My name is Shirley Weir. I'm the founder of Menopause Chick, and this is my friend. Whoops. I don't even know how to point. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Kim Vopni. I'm known as the Vagina Coach, and I use fitness and lifestyle strategies to help women prevent and overcome pelvic floor challenges like incontinence and organ prolapse, painful sex, chronic back pain, you name it, anything to do with health south of the belly button.
Yeah, I love that. And Kegels and Mocktails, everyone, as we were just speaking about, is your chance to ask us anything. So you get to set the agenda. We're here for an hour. If you haven't already done so, please find the chat on your Zoom screen, pop your questions in there. And yeah, we can't wait to hear what you want to talk about, anything related to vulva health, vaginal health, pelvic health, urinary incontinence, prolapse, vaginal atrophy, vaginal dryness. If you want to change your name on the screen, just do it. Just the only thing that you can't do is hold back. So that's our invitation. Yeah, ask us anything. Kim, what have you been up to? You have some news.
Yeah, I've launched a podcast. So
yeah, congratulations.
Thanks. It's it's kind of been in my head for a while, and I just had a lot on my plate, so it wasn't right time, and I was able to offload some of those things, and now I have capacity to do that. It's called Between Two Lips. Awesome. And you can find it wherever you find your podcasts. And yeah, today is the fifth episode actually launched yesterday. It launches every Wednesday, a weekly episode. And the podcast episode for this week is actually about something called levator avulsion. And this is actually a birth, it's most commonly associated with a birth injury where a portion of the pelvic floor muscles, so I'll just show you my pelvis here, but it's most common right here where the muscles can actually tear away from the bone, and it can be a partial or a complete tear, and it can happen on one or both sides. And statistically right now, we think it's about 30% of births actually have some sort of an avulsion. Some of them do resolve, some of them don't. They can increase the chances of incontinence and organ prolapse. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of treatment right now. There's some interesting things that are coming along the way. But anyway, the episode this week was with a woman who is now an advocate for people with prolapse and levator avulsion. She's in Australia. It's a very emotional episode, I will say.
Wow. Yeah. And so is each episode dedicated to one specific part of pelvic health?
Typically. So it may be a person who has experienced pelvic health. So in the case of Stephanie, she's now obviously an advocate for it as well, but it could be a doctor. It could be a pelvic floor physical therapist. I had a podiatrist. I've got pelvic health is not just go home and do your Kegels. It is such a bigger conversation than that. And we need a whole body approach. And my aim with the podcast is to provide free information that covers all of these options and opportunities that people didn't even know existed.
Totally. And I mean, I love the podcasting platform for doing that, because it is a great way to be like, okay, well, we experienced an in-person event recently too, but it was the same thing. It's like, I thought I was the only one. Now there's information that it's like, I'm listening to on my walk. I realize I'm not alone in this, and I'm assuming some next steps on what we can do about it.
Totally. Yeah. It takes a village, and I'm trying to bring a bunch of people together so that you can build your own pelvic health village as well.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. Before we get started too, we're nearing the end of February, which means there's a Buff Muff challenge coming up.
Yes, March 1st, the next Buff Muff challenge starts. So registration is open now, and the model is going to be switching slightly. So it's a good time to take action now. Not that it's not the actual challenge itself will change, but it's going to be blended into a bit bigger program going forward. So this is a good time to register, and March 1st, we will all get started again together.
Tell us what it is for those that weren't here last month.
28-day pelvic floor, a whole body pelvic floor fitness program. And it's 10 minutes a day. You are given a dedicated workout that it basically establishes or reestablishes the foundation. The pelvic floor is the foundation of our core. And when its parts are not working as well as they should be, then we can get some of those symptoms that I was talking about earlier, like incontinence and prolapse and pelvic pain and what have you. And when we can reestablish the connection and then incorporate it into whole body dynamic movement, that's where Kegels kind of fall short, where we're over here doing contract relaxes, but we leak when we run, or we leak when we're lifting something heavy. So it gets you to a point where you've reestablished that connection. You are now then ready to progress beyond that to other types of workouts. So it's a great starting place, and it's not sitting in your car doing 3 sets of 10-second hold Kegels 3 times a day for 28 days. You will be moving.
It's not that.
It's not that. So vaginacoach.com/buffmuff is where you can register, and it's app-based. There's a couple pieces of equipment that are nice to have. They're not need to have. So if you have a fitness ball, great. You don't need it. If you have like a strap or some sort of a scarf to stretch with, that's nice to have. So again, there's a couple things that are nice to have, even like a little tennis ball, but you could use a small apple if you want instead of a tennis ball. So
I'd squish the apple. I'm using a lacrosse ball right now with my pelvic floor physio, and it's so amazing.
Yeah.
And you can get different density of lacrosse balls too. So.
Yeah, it's like the exercise that nobody knows that we all need. Like, so many people benefit from that. It's called the posterior pelvic floor release. It is a magical exercise, and you'll find that in the challenge.
Magical. The Buff Muff challenge is magical too.
Yeah.
It's so weird. Hey, like I'm a word nerd, and you just talked about, like Kegels are not the only exercise, but yet we call it Kegels when we actually mean pelvic floor exercise, and we call it the vagina when we actually mean the vagina, the vulva, all the organs, in your models.
Yeah. Yeah. True story. But this is all, everything that you're doing and I'm doing in this call is really to arm people with information. So they become informed, then they know what to ask. They know that there's options, and it opens up doors that we just simply don't get in that 7 to 10 minute appointment with a doctor, where we don't even really know what we're asking about. We just need help with this, but how do we describe it? And how do we know that that's the best thing? Is that the only option? We deserve a lot more than we get during that.
Deserve a lot more.
Yeah.
100%. Okay. Yeah. We got some people chiming in.
All right, let's go.
Let's go. Any advice for vaginal dryness and painful sex? Yes, you've come to the right place. Yes. We have advice.
Yes. So vaginal dryness, I could hand that off to you if you want to start with that, and then
I'll chime in.
Okay. So vaginal dryness there's different reasons for it. A common one is a decline in estrogen, and that can happen after we've given birth in that postpartum phase. It can happen as we're approaching menopause and moving past that date as well. And that's one part of it. So it could be hormone related. It could also be that we have been wearing pads, whether it's for incontinence or we wear panty liners every day. Some people just think we should be. And those can actually create dryness. So that's another thing that we would want to look at. Also, if we don't move the tissue, if we aren't experiencing orgasm, insertion, it doesn't have to be a penis or hands, it could be our own selves or a toy, or if we sit a lot, if we hold ourselves in kind of tucked positions, we don't have a lot of blood flow and circulation, and that can inhibit the moisture production that we need as well. So those are a few things to discuss and look into. Hyaluronic acid, the Feel Amazing vaginal moisturizer, which Shirley will elaborate on, is an amazing product that we don't need a prescription for. It is highly, highly effective. We can put it inside, outside. She'll show you a demonstration of how to do it. And that can really be, it can be transformative and life-changing for so many things. And then just before I pass it back off to Shirley, the painful sex part could be because of vaginal dryness, because the tissues are not as lubricated. They may become a bit thinner as we approach and move beyond menopause. They may become a bit dry. That could be the cause of pain because of friction and degradation to the tissues. Painful sex could also be muscles. So if we have muscles that have more tone than what would be considered optimal, then that can sometimes inhibit insertion. It could be a cause of increased friction. It can interfere with our capacity for orgasm and achieving pleasure as well. So some people who may leak urine or may have prolapse, they could become on high alert. They're saying, oh, I don't want to leak. Especially I don't want to leak during sex. I don't want my prolapse to come out. So the muscles are often not letting go. And that can be a major contributor as well. So see a pelvic floor physical therapist, and I'll hand it off to Shirley to talk about the vaginal moisturizer.
Yeah, well said. I think the very first thing I would ask is, or ask you to do is to see a pelvic floor physiotherapist, because when someone says painful sex, I think that, again, words matter, and there can be an assumption that it's the friction part that Kim just mentioned, that it's, oh, you're, so many years away from menopause and estrogen has declined, which is like the most common reason for vaginal dryness, but pain with sex can be a symptom of many other things. So get that checked. If you are experiencing pain with sex, the second thing I would tell you is just stay away from penetrative sex until you can find a solution that's working for you. Don't put yourself through pain. And then the third thing I would tell you is that there are lots of viable solutions and easy ones. So you're not alone. And let's run through some of those right now. So Kim already mentioned, moving the tissue, which is really important. Pelvic floor exercise, sexual activity, maybe without insertion. Hyaluronic acid is a naturally occurring molecule that our body makes on its own, but it starts to decline in our 30s and 40s, and then significantly declines in postmenopause. So there is research that shows that you can moisturize with a non-prescription moisturizer. Menopause Chicks did create one. The members of our community have been working on this since 2019. Which is really cool. I love telling that story because it was actually members that asked me to go and find another solution. And we were talking about the stat before we jumped on the call today. The stat in the fall of 2019 was that 80% of women will experience vaginal dryness and less than 4% had a viable solution. So that's enough to keep me going. I am like a dog with a bone, and I want everyone to know to moisturize your vagina. You can get the Feel Amazing at moisturizeyourvagina.com, and you can also speak with your physician about the benefits of localized hormone therapy. So that might be estrogen, it might be DHEA. There's many ways to apply it to the vagina, a ring, a cream, a suppository, and lots of members, because we're all at different ages and stages, are using one, the other, or both. I have lots of members in the Menopause Chicks community that are getting along really well right now by using both. They found a protocol that's right for them. So yeah.
I would include myself there.
Awesome. Awesome. So if anybody else has questions about that, we can come back to that. But I want to move on to the next question, which is, Kim, you mentioned back pain. I'd like to know more about that.
So we can't see everybody here, but if I ask for a show of hands as to who has experienced low back pain, pretty much, I would say probably 80 to 90% of us would probably put our hands up, especially if we have experienced a pregnancy in our lives. But you don't have to have been pregnant. And there are several research studies showing the link between chronic back pain and pelvic floor dysfunction. One really fairly recent one, which was quite alarming, I think, is 95.3% of women in this study presenting with low back pain also had some form of pelvic floor dysfunction. The link is so common, and we have been chasing those symptoms with chiropractic and massage, acupuncture, pain relievers, regular physiotherapy, and all of those can absolutely play a role. They absolutely can. The missing link there, however, for so many people is the pelvis. When we can get the pelvic floor muscles working optimally and working in synergy with our diaphragm, which is our breath, releasing tension for some people, creating activation for some people, getting that balance. The back, I just spoke to a woman today on my group coaching call. She's in the current February 28-day challenge. And she said, I started this because of back pain. She said, I also have incontinence, but my main thing was actually back pain. She said, my back pain is totally gone and my incontinence is better. She said, it's not totally gone, but it definitely improved. And she had heard from somebody else about back pain and coming to do the challenge. And
wow.
Yeah, significant change. So if you have back pain, go see all of you. If you do one thing from this call, I would go see a pelvic floor physiotherapist. In Canada, they're called physiotherapists. In the United States, they're called physical therapists. It's the same thing. They have training as a physical therapist or physiotherapist, and then additional training in the pelvic floor that they are then licensed to evaluate and treat beyond the entrance to the vagina. It is, in my opinion, the most underused women's health resource that we have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is a super broad question, but can you talk about prolapse? What would it feel like? So some examples of symptoms, and then what can you do about it?
So prolapse is where the bladder, the uterus, and or the rectum shift out of their optimal anatomical position, and they can bulge into or descend into the vagina. So I always like to use this as a little bit of actually, let me start with this one first. So here's our internal organs. And now this is like textbook, right? But it gives us a little bit of an image. So this is how our organs line up. This is the bladder. This is the uterus. This is the vagina, this tube, and here's the rectum. And so this is how they sit within our pelvis. And if we have, many things can contribute to prolapse, but say the bladder starts to shift out of its position, it can bulge into the anterior or the front wall of the vagina. In the case of the rectum, it can bulge into the back wall of the vagina. And in the case of the uterus, it can start to descend down. So if this is the vagina, the tube, and this would be the bladder, and this would be the uterus up here, and this would be the rectum. If the bladder starts to prolapse or move out of its position, it tips and bulges into that front wall. So it creates a bulge, and that bulge can descend down and could even become visible at the entrance to the vagina. So some people look and they spread their lips and they notice they have a bulge right there. And that could be quite alarming to some people. Sometimes there's zero symptoms associated with that. Sometimes there will be symptoms along the way, but that's essentially what's happening in a prolapse. And statistically, 50% of women have some degree of prolapse. Alarming, right? And many don't know they have it. And incontinence wise, 30 to 40-ish% have some form of incontinence, usually stress urinary incontinence, where urine leaks out with a sneeze or a cough or what have you. So statistically, prolapse is much more common, but way less talked about and known about. Early stage symptoms could be back pain, could be a sense of heaviness or dragging, especially as the day moves on, where you feel like you want to sit down or you feel like you want to put counter pressure against your perineum. Difficulty inserting maybe a tampon, a menstrual cup. This is obviously for people that still menstruate, or a penis or fingers or toys. It feels like maybe there's something hits something, or it feels uncomfortable inside you to have something inserted. Difficulty emptying the bladder. So because of that little pocket, urine can get trapped in there, and that can make it difficult to fully empty the bladder. Same with the rectum. If the rectum is bulging in the back wall, we can get poop stuck in there, and it can make it hard to empty our bowels. That can contribute to constipation. Kind of like a feeling of, some people say that it feels like they're sitting on a golf ball, or some people say they feel like there's something inside their vagina. Those would be the most common symptoms. You could have a prolapse and not know about it. Some people feel it with their own fingers and they can feel a bulge. If they're feeling more, like if you put your fingers inside and you felt closer to so your anus would be down here. If you put your finger in this way and felt a bulge, it's more commonly a rectocele. If you put your fingers in this way and felt a bulge on the front wall, that would be your bladder. And kind of more down the center would be the uterus. You can have more than one type. Like you could have all three. The urethra can be involved in that sometimes. In people who've had a hysterectomy, having a hysterectomy increases the likelihood of developing a prolapse, which nobody is really ever told about. And that can increase even the intestines moving into that space where the uterus used to be. It's not a guarantee. So if you've had a hysterectomy, don't panic and freak out. It's just a piece of information to know, and more motivation for you to work with a pelvic floor physiotherapist and make sure you're doing pelvic floor exercise. And one technique that I love, especially for prolapse, is called hypopressives. I had a stage 2 uterine prolapse that I was able to reverse with hypopressives and pelvic floor exercise. I also had a stage 2 rectocele, and I lived with that for 9 years, and none of all the things that I do helped. And I eventually chose surgery 2 years ago for that. And I will say, even if you have surgery for any type of pelvic floor condition, pelvic floor exercise and physio, in my opinion, becomes even more important. Just because you've removed the symptoms doesn't mean you're woo. It doesn't mean that you don't have to do anything. I argue you need to do it even more.
Excellent explanation. I just want to point out that it's really fun to talk to you because you have all the toys. I only have my vulva vase. That's all I got.
Great thoughts. Yeah, I've collected a few cool props. One of actually the very first episode on my podcast, not me, like not my trailer, but the first guest I had is she's got all the props. She's a pelvic floor physio in the United States, and she's got amazing. Some of them she's like, I don't even know where I got this one, because all of us are going, where did you buy that? Yeah.
So fun. I'm going to skip to the next one just for a quick second, wondering how to find a pelvic floor physio in your area. It's super easy. I mean, ask at any physiotherapy or physical therapy office. If they don't have someone on staff who's qualified, they probably know someone in your neighborhood. But how would you answer that question?
Well, right now, I know that there is a more robust directory being created, but right now I would say go to Google and put in, we're in Vancouver, so Vancouver pelvic floor physiotherapy or physical therapy, or even just Vancouver pelvic floor. And that will typically bring up, so if you're in a more remote area, find the closest big city to your area and start with Google. There's also Pelvic Guru. She is a pelvic floor physical therapist, and she has a directory that is not just pelvic floor physios, but pelvic health professionals. And it's not an exhaustive list, but it's also another place to start. And then, of course, the American Physical Therapy Association website and the Canadian Physiotherapy Association website.
Yeah. I'm going to insert a little personal side note to this conversation too. It's intimidating to perhaps, hire a new healthcare professional for your team, especially if it's someone that's going to be working in an area that you're not all that familiar with yourself. But it's not like some of the stories that we hear about other women's experience with their healthcare professional. I hear a lot of women who are, disappointed, feel dismissed, whether it's at the doctor, maybe it's even at the dentist, for crying out loud. But I never, Kim, and I would hear the story if they were out there, I never hear someone coming to me saying, I didn't learn anything. That wasn't a positive experience for me. I just always hear great things.
Yeah. Yeah. They
And it's
are
hard to
amazing.
say that about a profession, but
Yeah.
like it's hard to
Yeah.
find a profession where it's just so positive and enlightening each and
Yeah.
every time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's life-changing. It really is.
Okay. This is in reference to the condition that you talked about for your most current podcast.
Yep.
How would you know if you had that condition?
Some physios will screen for it, and a way that they can is, so in a physiotherapy appointment, they use gloved fingers to palpate around the external genitalia, and then they will insert one, potentially two fingers into the vagina. And what they can do is they feel for the tone of the muscles, they feel for the position of the organs, they feel for your capacity to do a Kegel, contract, lift, and let go. And then I'm going to use this model on the inside. Once they're, and my finger won't fit through this model, but if you can imagine that my finger was on the inside here, they can feel on the aspects of the bones where the muscles attach to. And they feel like, it's like feeling how much sponginess in a way is there. If they can feel bone, that's not ideal. And that could be like a clue saying that that's something that we want to look into. Usually imaging will be what's used to 100% confirm an avulsion diagnosis. Could be an MRI, ultrasound, but it usually will start out with a palpation. Physios will then sometimes maybe refer on to urogyns who can then start to prescribe the imaging that would be required for that.
Cool. This is a good one from Marilyn. When I'm concentrating, sitting at the computer or watching TV, I don't feel like I have to pee. The minute I stop concentrating on whatever, I have to urgently pee. So much so, it's hard to get to the bathroom without leaking. What is the connection between these two things, and what is the solution?
So you mentioned sitting. So when we are sitting, there is a counter pressure against our pelvic floor, which can be supportive almost. And then when we get up and change position, all of a sudden there's now more influence of gravity, the muscles need to react and change. And that could then, if maybe the position of the bladder was in one spot and now we've stood up and it changes, that could be a contributing factor. It could be that when we are sitting as well, especially if we're not sitting in an optimal position, like a lot of times when we sit, we end up sitting a little bit more tucked, so our tailbone is underneath us, and we apply a lot of pressure on the tailbone, which that's one of the attachment. Here's the tailbone. That's one of the attachment points of the pelvic floor. So if we have a lot of pressure there, it can interfere with some of the nerve signaling. If we've had any damage to that area, so maybe episiotomies or tearing from childbirth or any other type of pelvic surgeries, that could interrupt some of the nerve signaling so that we're not getting the messages in certain positions. And then once we stand up and things change, then potentially the bladder was in one position and it wasn't necessarily creating any urgency, but now we get up and move around and all of a sudden it's there. It could also just be that the bladder knows that when you stand up, woohoo, we're going to the bathroom. And so it's like getting excited and it starts to send these, these alarm bells in a way. And so that's more commonly, what you're describing is more common with urge incontinence. So with incontinence, there's stress incontinence, and that's where little bits of urine leak out with a laugh, cough, sneeze, or jump. And urge incontinence is, as you've described, where you're fine, and then all of a sudden there's something that happens that signals to the bladder that it's time to go, and it starts to almost go into spasm and contract. And this is urgency or urge incontinence. The two, stress urinary incontinence responds best to exercise. Urge incontinence, exercise can play a role, but bladder training is actually where I would start with that person. First of all, I would have another few questions. How close to menopause are you, and do you use hyaluronic acid or vaginal estrogen? And also, do you eliminate, like have a poop at least once a day, and is it complete? Like, do you get a nice big complete long wrist to elbow poop log coming out? If not,
we have to do an event on poop. Sorry for
We do. Then when we're constipated, if you think about how closely everything nestles in here, when we have a big lump of poop in here, it can apply pressure in through the vagina onto the bladder as well. And that can create some of that urgency. And again, if we're shifting around, that could be a contributor. So those are a couple of other questions, but how we work on changing that is to find out what triggers are. So it could be constipation, could be that I need some estrogen in my vagina, could be just that I'm sitting in bad positions. I don't allow the pelvic floor to work properly. I get up and there's like an automatic trigger. So we can change that by adding in another sort of distraction. So as we get up, we're talking to our bladder. I don't know if we're full right now. So let me back up. Normal voiding is every 2.5 to 4 hours. So if you've been sitting for 3 or 4 hours, chances, and you've been drinking, chances are you are going to have to go. If that's the case, then you're going to talk to your bladder as you're standing up. We are going to go to the bathroom. I am in control, not you. There's no need to be alarmed. And you're walking towards the bathroom. If walking makes it worse, you can stand in one place and go up and down on your toes. So doing calf raises, and you're going to talk to your bladder and say, it's okay. There's no need for alarm. We will be going to the bathroom shortly. You can also do toe scrunching. So instead of toe lifting, you're going to scrunch your toes under. You could also do Kegels. So if you know how to contract your pelvic floor and lift, you could do that. You could also contract and lift and walk slowly to the bathroom while you hold. And the idea is to let that alarm bell subside so that you can then calmly walk to the bathroom and void. Now it's not going to happen overnight. It will take a few times, but by you, and you can talk inside your head, but talk to your bladder and work on the distractions, and slowly getting to the toilet will help, while you are also working on strengthening the pelvic floor. And by, I should say, optimizing the pelvic floor means you have a balance between the contraction and lift and the letting go. Because sometimes if we're on high alert, as I was talking about, excuse me, earlier, that also can create alarm bells and irritate the bladder. And especially if we've been sitting in that tucked position, the muscles are shorter and tighter. And if we're afraid of leaking, they're going to be holding on even more. So we need to work on actually finding the balance of lengthening and relaxing the pelvic floor, and then building back in some strength from there. So that's where I would start, and see a pelvic floor physical therapist.
And take Kim's 28-day challenge, Marilyn, if you haven't already, because some of those things that she just talked about are in the challenge. And it's really cool because if you're like me and like new habits are kind of hard to incorporate into your day, it's an app. And so it actually reminds you to go and take 10 minutes for you. So do it. Okay, Paula, on that topic of vaginal dryness, how about VagiFem? I was prescribed this by my gynecologist, haven't purchased yet. I would usually ask Paula how old you are and the date of your last period. I would assume if you got a prescription for VagiFem, which is a brand name. It's a brand name for localized estrogen therapy. It's bioidentical. It's probably one of the more common forms of vaginal estrogen that is prescribed. And yeah, go fill it, I would say, and moisturize your vagina with Feel Amazing. And let me know if you have any other questions. Post-menopause leakage and mild prolapse. Tried one pelvic floor, but could not get the results of doing a Kegel. Could not get the results from doing a Kegel, I think it means. Suggestions. Do I try another? And are there aids so that I know if I'm doing it properly?
So if you're seeing a pelvic floor physical therapist, ideally they are assessing your capacity to do a Kegel. So part of that, and not every first appointment will have every aspect. So it'll depend on the person. So sometimes an internal evaluation doesn't happen on that first appointment. It could be looking at posture. It could be looking on your breath. It could be, there's other things to look at. When the internal evaluation happens, usually it could be, it's like 5 to 10 minutes, unless there is a need to maybe release some scar tissue or what have you. So it could potentially be a titch longer, but they would, with their fingers, their gloved fingers inserted, they would be feeling for, again, the tone between the two sides, but then is there a gentle hug and a lift and a let go of the pelvic floor? So that's what they would assess. That's what I consider to be gold standard. If the physio did not do that, then you could go in for a subsequent appointment. If they didn't do it the first time, it doesn't mean that they're a bad physio. It just means they were looking at other things. And now you need that internal appointment. For people that don't have access to physio for whatever reason, there are some devices. One common one is the PeriFit.
Yeah.
And it is a biofeedback device that looks like this. This is actually Bluetooth. So this is outside the vagina. This would be inserted into the vagina. And this hangs out and communicates with an app on your phone. And what happens is when you contract and lift and let go with your pelvic floor muscles, it will register on the app. And it's like video games. So it'll have you be a bird that's trying to avoid the clouds in the sky, or a rabbit jumping over mushrooms or something like that. Like it's quite engaging. I do quite like it. That being said, these are, $150 to $200. And if you have that money and geographically have access to a physio, I would put your money to the physio first, and they can help you decide if this is going to be helpful for you. Because some people interpret their symptoms as my pelvic floor is weak and therefore I need more Kegels. And if we are actually holding on to more tension, doing more contraction initially is not going to solve the problem. We need that balance. So that's one tool. There's another one called the LV, which also is a biofeedback device and can help you see when you're contracting and relaxing. So those are a couple of places to start. You're postmenopausal. So I would also ask, as Shirley does, are you moisturizing, and are you using any vaginal estrogen? And also, I have a few videos on my YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and put in Vagina Coach, you'll find my channel. And I walk through different visualizations with my vulva puppet and different cues and imagery that you can use. And then you've got your own biofeedback with fingers. You can insert your own fingers into your vagina and see if you feel the gentle hug and lift and let go. Or if you have a partner, their fingers. If you have a male partner, their penis. All of those are ways that you can feel for that contract, lift, and let go.
Yeah. I was going to add, actually, during the pandemic, I saw my pelvic floor physio virtually. So, you can have because most of what you do when they're working with you is like education and conversation, and then you're using your own fingers, and you can learn that way too.
Yeah. And there's a lot of power, and a lot of people have never explored. And it can be a bit intimidating at first, but when you have somebody guiding you through, it can again really be a great teaching opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Shelley has it's a bit of a long one, but I have done vaginal rejuvenation laser treatments 2 years ago to great success. The incontinence has returned, and my doctor says I have stage 2 bladder prolapse. I have just received the Titra vaginal laser device to use at home. Haven't used it yet. My first pelvic floor physiotherapist appointment is in 2 weeks, followed by an appointment with my gynecologist. What are your thoughts on Titra, and should I begin using it before my appointments?
Okay, lots in there. So vaginal rejuvenation, there are so many different treatments and therapies available. Some of them are very evidence-based. Some of them can work for certain conditions. The challenge is they aren't always addressing root cause. So some will address the tissue integrity, but they're not addressing nerves. They're not addressing muscle function. Even though we might say it fixes incontinence, it does this. It's not doing any exercise for you, so to speak. And so they might relieve symptoms temporarily, but 9 times out of 10, they come back because that hasn't been the root cause of what contributed to it starting in the first place. So they're temporary at best, and they're quite expensive. So again, it's not something that I would refer to somebody to do as a first line of defense. I'm glad to see that you're seeing a pelvic floor physical therapist. Stage 2 bladder prolapse could potentially contribute sometimes to incontinence. It could also mask incontinence in some people. So if the bladder is bulging, it can put a kink in the urethra, and that sometimes masks incontinence. And when people get their prolapse fixed, whether surgically or on their own, then all of a sudden the incontinence is there, and they're thinking, how is that happening, and that's often the case. So yours could be contributing a little bit to incontinence. So I would want to work on hypopressives and seeing your pelvic floor physio to actually start doing those exercises. And the Titra is an at-home device. There's another one called the V-Sculpt that I really like for at home. And again, they have evidence, they can be helpful, but all of the lasers in the world are not going to address the function, the reaction time of the pelvic floor, and the strength and the endurance in those muscles. So those can be used in conjunction with something like my challenge or the exercises that the pelvic floor physio would give to you. Going to see a gynecologist is, again, those are people we need on our healthcare team. They're typically bringing us down the path of medications and surgery, which when we need them, we are lucky to have them. But many people are like, well, I've done this and it didn't work. I've done these therapies and and they haven't worked. So I guess I need surgery. But if you have not addressed the exercise component, posture, bladder training, whole body exercise, that's a missing link. And I would not go down the path of rejuvenation therapies, or, I mean, you have a Titra already. I wouldn't say there's any harm in trying it and starting it, but make sure that you become consistent with pelvic floor exercise.
A really good friend told me once, you can't outsource your Kegels.
That was me.
I know.
Okay, I thought you were like I told you that.
I'm just telling everybody, like, we're not saying don't use devices, but you do have to remember that our demographic looks really good on a spreadsheet to somebody who's trying to sell us something. And the reality is that you can achieve some of the results, the positive results that Kim is talking about, but you can't outsource it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're like, that's our life now, right? We outsource everything.
Yeah.
We can sit on our couch with a remote control. We can open and close our shades. We can turn the TV on. We can order food. We can answer phone. Like we're not as a society moving like we used to, and right. We don't move in natural ways. And that's part of what's contributing to the challenges that we face.
Yeah, for sure. And then the next time that you go to, lift a toddler, or maybe you haven't done that in a few years, right? Or carry in your big Costco order, you're out of
shape for it. Yeah,
we haven't for it. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of people who have incontinence or especially prolapse are told you can't lift anything. You can't lift over anything over X number of pounds, or you can't run and you can't jump. And that's not training and building resilience in that group of muscles. That is contributing to more atrophy and more challenge. And it's also increasing our risk of bone problems, osteoporosis and heart problems, because we're not exercising. We absolutely need to move and we need to lift. We just need to do it in a way that we have reestablished that foundation, and we are progressively loading it to increase capacity to manage the things that life throws at us.
Cool. I just had a direct message from somebody and I was copying it just to make sure I don't lose it. It's not a question, but next question is there a difference, benefits for dryness, between estrogen inserted via the vagina versus oral estrogen? Yes, there is actually. So when our cycles are regular, estrogen is produced by our ovaries in the first 2 weeks of our cycle. And progesterone is the hormone produced in the second 2 weeks. And once we reach menopause, so 12 months period free, generally speaking, estrogen goes for a steep decline. So if you think back to our quality of life and how we were feeling before that time, estrogen was doing a lot of work, developing an egg to be released every single month, but it was also protecting our heart and our brain and our bones and our vagina. And when it comes specifically to your question, when it comes to vaginal dryness and vaginal atrophy, sometimes if you're taking estrogen, like this is mine, apply it transdermally, it might be enough. Right. And it really kind of depends on your age and stage, which is why in the Menopause Chicks community, I ask you to start your questions with that information, because it really helps to determine, if your last period was 8 months ago, then systemic hormone therapy might be enough to prevent vaginal dryness. And it might not be too, because everyone's different. But if your last period was, 8, 10, 12 years ago, that systemic estrogen is probably not going to be enough. The vagina loves estrogen. And estrogen, in addition to developing an egg and protecting all those major organs like our heart and brain and bones, it is responsible for lubrication in the vagina and the skin and in our entire body, right? So if you've noticed that other parts of your body are getting drier, it might be benefiting from systemic estrogen, but treating vaginal dryness, that's why we use the word localized, because it's like, let's get it to the actual spot where it needs that estrogen. And I mentioned DHEA earlier. DHEA is new in Canada just at the end of last year, the end of 2022. And DHEA is another, hormone that we don't hear a lot about, but it is effective for treating vaginal dryness. And I can't tell you exactly how this works because I'm not a scientist, but when inserted, your body actually knows how to convert DHEA into the amount of estrogen that your vagina needs.
And testosterone too.
And testosterone, yes.
Yeah. And Intra Rosa is a brand name for it. Dr. Anna Kabeka has a product called Julva, which has DHEA, which I also really like as well. And just one more thing I want to add on top of the information Shirley shared was with regards to oral estrogen. So more and more evidence is coming out with regards to systemic hormone therapy that is recommending transdermal as opposed to oral.
Absolutely. 100% transdermal.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because Josephine asked about oral. Yeah. Not oral. Transdermal, apply, your pharmacist will instruct you how to apply it. Sometimes that's, on a place in your body where the skin is a bit thinner, like the inside of your arm or the inside of your thighs. But for the vagina, as I mentioned earlier, you can use Vagifem, which got mentioned. That's a suppository. There are also creams and gels and rings. Yeah. Thanks for that. Okay. Can vaginal dryness lead to the skin in your vagina to tear, or could that be due to low estrogen? The answer is yes and yes. Yes.
And one other thing I would add on there is also a condition called lichen sclerosis, which is it has an autoimmune component to it, and it can create thin, almost opaque, kind of whitish tissue. So it's also a good opportunity for us to recognize the importance of looking at our vulvas. So putting a mirror in between our legs and looking to see what our skin looks like. If we're seeing a pelvic floor physical therapist regularly, they can also help with that screening. But just noticing if where you feel that dryness or that tearing, is the tissue also kind of white and opaque? And if so, it would be important to be screened for lichen sclerosis, because that would be vaginal moisturizer and estrogen can be a component to that. But there's another need, specifically steroids, actually, that would be required for the management of that.
Yeah, 100%. This line of questions that we're getting from our guests, it makes me so grateful that we're doing this, Kim, because we don't always get to go to this level in a Facebook community. And this particular question is actually leading me to another important thought, which is if there's tearing, that can also sometimes lead to bleeding. And when you're in postmenopause or at any stage of our life over 40 odd years that we menstruate, for that matter, bleeding is sometimes not considered a very big deal for women. But if you're bleeding, it is a very big deal if you're in postmenopause. And so we have to really flex our curiosity muscle and ask, is there infection? Is there another condition at play? Is this from atrophy? Or, is this a sign of gynecological cancer? And all of those things can be true. So, do trust your intuition, but also rely on your healthcare team or our communities to ask those questions, because you don't want it to go and just be like, oh yeah, it's blood. I'm not concerned about it.
Yeah, great point.
Okay, if there's time for another question, well, yes, you're up next. I had surgery last year for endometriosis on bilateral. I don't even know if I can get through this, on bilateral
uterosacral ligaments.
Yeah, come on, Kim, jump in.
As well as fibroid removal. I'm using hormones, progestin, but I am still experiencing endo pain related to the sacral nerves. Are there symptoms, or are these symptoms or tips that you find most? Are there, symptoms or tips that you find most helpful than endometriosis related conditions? Okay, so, and no access to pelvic floor PT. So endometriosis is where uterine-like tissue grows outside of the uterus anywhere in the body, excuse me, and can be very, very painful, pain in and around the pelvis, but there could be pain elsewhere in the body as well. So you've had excision on bilaterals of both sides of your uterosacral ligaments, and you also had fibroids removed. So I would ask lots of questions with regards to diet and stress and sleep. You are on hormones, but progestins are typically the synthetic. So I would potentially guide you to reading some information on bioidentical hormones. And now you've got so is the pain different now than it used to be? You said endo pain now related to the sacral nerve. So I'm assuming, I don't know, but I think you're saying it's maybe different pain than you were experiencing before. So in terms of managing that without access to a pelvic floor physical therapist, some of these I'm sure you know very, very well, but heat, removing sources of inflammation in our tissue, sleep, meditation, and like self myofascial release and stretch and pelvic floor release exercises that can address the tissue in the pelvis itself directly, but also then have a calming effect so that the nervous system can let go, because sometimes the upregulation of the nervous system because of pain and that's kind of where that, we get into this bit of hamster wheel situation. So I don't know all of the different types of therapies that you have tried, but making sure it's kind of a whole body approach, and then working specifically with guided meditation specific to the pelvic floor. I have a lot of different release and pelvic pain therapy exercise routines on my YouTube channel, so you could come and start there as well. And yeah, that's what I got there. And I'm sorry you don't have access to a pelvic floor PT.
Yeah, I mean, that's just an example of how so many women are dealing with a lot.
Yeah.
And not all of us have, the privilege that you and I have to walk down the street and access that healthcare. So stay in touch, circle back and let us know how you are doing. Nancy, I didn't mean to skip over your question about DHA, but I think we answered it on the tail end of the last question. So if you have any more, need any more clarification on that, let me know. Shelley says, thanks so much. I'm looking forward to my pelvic floor physiotherapist appointment and these exercises. Very cool. Can you recommend a pad, organic or underwear garment like Nix, as I work towards no longer needing a light pad? I want to keep my skin healthy. Well,
so
Nix, good one.
Yeah, Nix is a Canadian woman, started that company around the same time that I started one of my companies, actually. So we were she spoke at one of my first Vancouver Kegels and Cocktails events, right when she was starting her business, and she just totally exploded into the world and has done amazing things. But and Nix, to my knowledge, there's been some uproar in the community with regards to PFAS in like chemicals in incontinence type underwear or leak proof underwear. Another company called Thinx was kind of under the radar. So to my knowledge, the first time there was an uproar, Nix came in and said ours are clear. With this second round of uproar, I haven't seen a confirmation that that is true. One company that I do like, local here in Vancouver, is called Isle, AISLE. They started out, they were the first reusable menstrual pads called Luna pads. And they had a brand refresh, probably, it was just before the pandemic, actually. Yeah. And they are confirmed pure, great, love their products. That's who I would recommend. And yeah, just making sure that you're doing the other work as well, which sounds like you are, but that's who I would recommend for.
Yeah. And you have a good goal, which is amazing.
Yes.
So congratulate yourself on that.
Yeah.
Can you clarify when or why you would choose hyaluronic acid versus a vaginal estrogen cream? Are they needed together, or can you use one without the other? Yes, yes, and yes. If you remember, if you were here at the top of the call, Kim was kind of talking about some of the root causes of dryness. So it might be postpartum, it might be someone who's taking the birth control pill, it might be someone who's in perimenopause and their hormones are fluctuating, it might be the result of somebody going through cancer treatment, it could be another health condition, it could be medications causing dryness, and it could be estrogen decline post-menopause. So that's one answer to why you might use hyaluronic acid, which is a naturally occurring molecule, and it's a non-prescription moisturizer. So if you're postpartum, or you're on the birth control pill, or you're going through cancer treatment, you would probably choose hyaluronic acid. It has been shown in the research by Dr. Petra Stute, who's a Swiss gynecologist, and her team, that hyaluronic acid is as effective as localized estrogen for the treatment of vaginal dryness. Now, all of that said, estrogen goes for a steep decline post-menopause. And so for me, for example, you might be sailing along thinking, hey, I'm gonna like prevent vaginal dryness. And I did. And it worked, and it worked, and it worked, and worked. And now I'm 56. I'm 7 years post-menopause. And I really feel that, at my last appointment with my naturopath, I've been using systemic estriadol and progesterone. I've now added vaginal estrogen. And it's a choice that I want to make because my vagina misses that estrogen, right?
And I think sorry, go ahead. I thought you
I
finished.
was just going to say, as for using them both at the same time, usually the direction that I give to members is, yes, use them both. You would follow the directions from your prescriber. So localized estrogen would probably be prescribed 2 to 3 times a week. Use that on those days, and then moisturize on the alternate days, or depending on your stage of dryness, you might moisturize in the morning. Like I usually shower, moisturize, just part of your regular routine, and then use the localized estrogen at night. And the other thing with the moisturizer is you can't get it wrong. There are instructions, but you get to devise the protocol that's right for you. And because hyaluronic acid is a super strong molecule, it can carry 1,000 times its weight in moisture. You can use it 2 to 3 times a day to start, and you'll be putting that natural moisture back into the cells of the vulva and the vaginal wall. And then you know that you'll be able to taper back to once a day or every other day even. Sorry, you were going to say.
I was just going to add on there, I don't know of any evidence for this, and correct me if you know something different, but one of the other challenges with a decline in estrogen is it changes the pH in our vaginas, and we become more prone to UTIs. And I don't believe that hyaluronic acid alone can alter the pH. Do you know of that?
No, but we do have the research that shows that without estrogen, we are more like the urethra gets shorter and smaller. And
right. So we have that research, but we don't have it with regards to hyaluronic acid. Correct. So I would say, especially if you're prone to UTIs, that probably using both would be a good idea.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good one. We didn't touch on UTIs today, but maybe next month. Will you come back and do this again next month?
Always.
Okay. Thank you so much. Beyond thankful. Thank you so much. I am learning a lot. Amazing. Okay. We got just a couple more, Kim, before we wrap it up. Perimenopause, still get periods every 6 weeks or so, but was prescribed estrogen and progesterone for dryness. Would localized estrogen be better than Divigel? Not getting many hot flushes, but lots of dryness. It's really difficult for us to say what is better, but one of the things that I like to do is kind of encourage you to create a list of questions. So maybe you got some information here tonight that can make you curious and help you prepare for your next health appointment. If there are specific questions that you want to go through with your prescriber, just send me a message and we can do that together. Estrogen is not always prescribed in perimenopause. So that would be one of the questions that I might ask, because estrogen is generally high or higher in perimenopause. And generally speaking, we don't need the estrogen until postmenopause. I suspect that maybe it's because you had hot flashes and that's why you were prescribed that particular protocol, but that's just an assumption on my part. Bottom line is you are not meant to suffer, and you have options available to make sure that you're treating your vaginal dryness. That could be localized hormone therapy added to this protocol you're currently using. It could be the moisturizer, or it could be both.
Yeah. Before you go on, there was a follow-up to the woman who had the endometriosis question. So she's doing bioidentical progesterone when she can get it. She does the lifestyle things, and she was just wondering about internal self-care. So part of the myofascial release is and what I have on my YouTube is the external, and you can use wands. So for instance, like Intimate Rose is a brand that I really like. She's also a recent guest on my podcast. Dr. Amanda Olson, she is a pelvic floor physical therapist, and pelvic wands. So this is just one version of it. They have a thin end, they have a thicker, this end has a little bit of a point. Some of them just have the bulbous round point here, but these are inserted either end into the vagina, and you can use them for internal self myofascial release, which is trying to mimic what a therapist could be doing. So it can help you find trigger points. If there happens to be scar tissue, which you have, that can help mobilize some of the scar tissue to increase blood flow and circulation as well. So that would be another tool I would recommend.
Amazing. Okay, I was told no estrogen because of breast cancer in my family. We could probably do a whole session on estrogen, but your family history is not one of the guiding decision makers. It's called shared decision making that you go through with your prescriber. I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there. I mean, many of us have cancer or breast cancer in our family. What you really want to be talking about with your provider is what are your individual risk factors, and that could be anything from heart disease, high cholesterol, breast cancer. You want to be addressing your overall health, and that's a risk assessment that we should be going through anytime we're engaging in any type of therapy, not just hormone therapy. But I like to speak with women and empower them to maybe ask the question, because estrogen is an important hormone, and if it's something that's going to increase the overall quality of your health now, as well as for the next 3 to 5 decades.
And I would say
there. We're after 5 o'clock, but my masterclass is on Sunday, menopause-masterclass.com if you want to join me, because we will get into it more on Sunday. Sorry, go.
Yeah, I'm just going to say I wrote the title of a book that I really like that is evidence-based, written by a doctor who is an oncologist whose wife had breast cancer, and he talks about the use of hormone therapy for that population. So it's a good way for you to become more informed on the evidence and the research. It's also a great tool to potentially bring to a doctor who may be challenging you on some of the information. And just one final thing is, drinking alcohol is an increased risk of breast cancer. And a lot of people have this huge, immense fear of hormone therapy, and they have, several glasses of red wine either a day or per week. And that isn't an increased risk of breast cancer, almost equal to. So we have to kind of look at all of the things. And as you said, look at our whole picture and risk profile before just totally shutting the door or opening it up.
Yeah, for sure. So in the masterclass, I'm now in this February edition, I'm also including an extra hour, which is called a hormone therapy Q&A intensive. And what I do is I've taken the positioning statement from the North American Menopause Society and I've unpacked it. And then it includes a lot of Q&A and definitely has specific messages for women who have had breast cancer or, kind of have not quite yet had the opportunity to sort through all this information. It takes some work. It takes some dedicated time to be like, I heard this, I used to believe this, my doctor says this, what's the truth? What do we know now? And how do I bring all that into my next conversation with my doctor? So that's what that's all about.
Yeah, awesome. Good
yes.
questions,
And thanks
everybody.
for putting Estrogen Matters in there. That's great.
Yeah, that book and the Estrogen Fix are two that I've really enjoyed reading. They're both very evidence-based. They do talk more to the synthetic hormones, I will say, and the research that I'm following is more towards bioidentical, but it does give you the history of what created a lot of the fear about hormone therapy, as well as the more updated research that is now contributing to the position statement of North American Menopause Society, for instance, and other practitioners who are prescribing and working with women for hormones.
Yeah. And I'm happy to do script tips. So it's kind of my thing. Yeah. And if that is something that you feel that would be helpful walking into your next health appointment, to say, things like, hey, I've been doing my own research and here's what I would like to discuss with you today. I'm happy to do that with you.
Awesome.
Did we get to the end?
I think we did.
We did.
Yeah.
Thanks for staying, everybody. Kim, I don't have the date in front of me for March, but we do have, just watch the Menopause Chicks community or the Vagina Coaches Instagram page and watch for our next edition of Kegels and Mocktails. I've got sparkling water. I don't know what you guys were drinking. I forgot to ask you at the top, but thank you very much for joining us. If you're watching this on replay, thank you for signing up. We actually, Kim and I both love Q&A sessions, and it's amazing when so many of you take time out of your busy schedules and dedicate an hour to your vulva, vaginal, and pelvic health. So thanks for showing up. Thanks to you, Miss Vagina Coach.
Thank you to you, Miss Menopause Chick.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.